They say the eyes are the window to the soul, but what if the thing looking at you doesn't have a soul? What if it doesn't have a heartbeat, or breath, or blood? What if it's just fiberglass and paint? Yet somehow, it's looking right at you with an intensity that screams of something far worse than death. I have a story for you tonight that comes from a man named Elias, a guy who took a job that was supposed to be the easiest money of his life, but ended up costing him his sanity. Elias was a night owl by nature, so when he saw the listing for a graveyard shift security guard at the old Crestwood Mall, he didn't hesitate. You know the kind of place? It was one of those dying shopping centers built in the 90s, with neon lights that buzz too loud and tiles that smell permanently of lemon wax and dust. The job was simple. Sit in a security booth, watch the bank of 32 monitors, and do a physical patrol once every 2 hours. For the first 3 weeks, the job was exactly what Elias expected. Boring. Painfully boring. He brought books, he scrolled on his phone, he drank lukewarm coffee, and he watched the grainy black and white feeds of empty corridors and darkened storefronts. The only things keeping him company were the mannequins. Crestwood Mall had a lot of clothing stores, and for some reason the mannequins there always felt a little too realistic. They weren't those abstract headless ones you see in modern shops. These were the old school kind. They had painted eyes, sculpted hair, and frozen smiles that looked a little too wide in the dark. It was a Tuesday night around 2:45 a.m. when everything changed. Elias was sitting in the booth, his feet up on the desk, half watching the monitors. He was staring at camera 4, which covered the entrance to a department store called Moda. In the display window, there were 3 mannequins, 2 female figures in evening gowns, and 1 male figure in a tuxedo standing slightly behind them. Elias looked down at his phone to check a text message. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. When he looked back up at camera 4, he frowned. The male mannequin was gone. Elias blinked, leaning closer to the screen. The feed was grainy, so he figured his eyes were playing tricks on him. Maybe the angle was weird. He switched the view to camera 5, which showed the interior of the store. The tuxedo mannequin. There it was. But it wasn't in the window. It was standing in the middle of the aisle facing the jewelry counter. Elias felt a cold prickle run down the back of his neck. He reasoned with himself immediately. Maybe the day shift janitors had moved it and he just hadn't noticed until now. But that didn't make sense. He had been staring at that window for 3 hours. It was definitely in the window before. He had to go do a physical check. He grabbed his flashlight and his radio, though there was no one to radio to. He told himself it was probably a prank. Maybe some kids had hidden in the mall after closing and were messing with him. He walked out of the security office and into the main atrium. The silence of a mall at night is heavy. It presses against your ears. Every footstep Elias took echoed like a gunshot on the tile floor. He made his way toward Moda, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the gloom. When he reached the store, the metal gate was down, but it was that see-through chain link style. He shone his light through the gaps. The aisle was empty. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. It was just a glitch in the camera feed, or maybe a shadow. He shone the light towards the display window to reassure himself. The 2 female mannequins were there, but the male one was definitely missing. Then he heard it, a sound coming from deep inside the store. Click, drag, click, drag. It sounded like hard plastic tapping against tile. Elias shouted, "Security, come out now, police are on the way." Dig. He waited for a full minute, heart hammering against his ribs, but nothing moved. He decided to head back to the security room to review the footage properly before calling the cops. He turned around and started walking back toward the elevators. That's when he passed the kids zone, a store filled with child-sized mannequins. He glanced inside as he walked by. They were all pressed against the glass. Elias froze. He knew for a fact that the display in that store was a playground scene set up in the back. But now, 12 small plastic figures were lined up against the front window, their painted faces staring blankly out into the hallway, staring at him. He didn't walk back to the office. He ran. He burst into the security room and slammed the heavy steel door, locking it. He scrambled into his chair and looked at the wall of monitors. Elias gasped. Every single screen showed movement. On camera 8, the mannequins from the sporting goods store were crawling, actually crawling, out of the display, their limbs moving with stiff, jerky, unnatural motions. On camera 12, a headless torso was dragging itself across the food court floor. But the worst was camera 4, the tuxedo mannequin from Moda. It wasn't in the store anymore. It was standing right outside the security office door. Elias spun around in his chair and stared at the steel door of the room. There was no window, just a solid slab of metal between him and that thing. Bang. A heavy plastic fist hit the door. Bang, bang. Elias grabbed the phone to dial 911, but the line was dead. No dial tone, just a low, static hissing sound. He looked back at the monitors. The tuxedo mannequin wasn't banging on the door anymore. It was standing perfectly still, looking up at the security camera in the hallway. And then, it did something impossible. It raised a stiff, plastic hand and pointed. Not at the door, it pointed down the hall. Elias followed the direction on the other monitors. The mannequin was pointing toward the basement access, the boiler room. Why would it want him to go there? The banging returned, louder this time. More fists joined in. On the monitors, Elias could see dozens of them swarming the hallway outside his door. They were piling up, their lifeless bodies slamming against the metal. The frame began to rattle. Elias knew he couldn't stay there. The door wouldn't hold forever. His only exit was the ventilation hatch in the ceiling that led to the maintenance catwalks. He scrambled up the desk, pushed the tile aside, and hauled himself up into the dark, dusty crawl space just as the security door buckled inward. He crawled through the darkness, listening to the sound of plastic bodies flooding into the room below. He could hear the screeching of chairs being thrown and the crunch of monitors being smashed. He navigated the catwalks, trying to find a way out, but every exit sign he crawled toward seemed to lead him deeper into the building. He eventually found himself looking down through a grate into the boiler room, the place the mannequin had pointed to. He shone his flashlight down. The boiler room wasn't empty. In the center of the room, there was a large industrial workbench, and on the workbench, there were molds, casts, the kind used to make mannequins. But there were also clothes. A security guard's uniform lay folded neatly on a chair. A name tag was pinned to the chest. Elias squinted. The name tag read, David. Elias remembered David. David was the guy who worked this shift before him. Management said David had quit suddenly, moved out of state without notice. Elias moved the light further across the room. In the corner, standing perfectly still, was a brand new mannequin. It was incredibly detailed. The skin texture was flawless. The eyes were a piercing blue. It was wearing a tuxedo. Elias felt the vomit rise in his throat. The mannequin looked exactly like David. Suddenly, the grate beneath Elias gave way. The rusted metal snapped, and he fell, crashing onto the concrete floor of the boiler room. Pain shot through his leg, his ankle twisted at a sickening angle. He tried to stand, but he couldn't. He dragged himself backward, his flashlight beam dancing wildly around the room. From the shadows of the boiler room, figures began to emerge. They weren't just mannequins. They were moving with purpose now. Smooth, fluid. The tuxedo mannequin, the one that looked like David, stepped forward. Its jaw didn't move, but a voice echoed in the room, sounding like it was coming from a speaker buried deep inside its chest. Shift change, the voice buzzed. It was distorted, electronic, but it sounded unmistakably like a human man screaming in a whisper. Elias tried to crawl away, but two of the female figures grabbed his arms. Their grip wasn't plastic hard, it was terrifyingly warm. They dragged him toward the workbench. He screamed, kicking and thrashing, but they were impossibly strong. They hoisted him onto the table. The David mannequin leaned over him. It held a bucket of thick, translucent liquid. It smelled like resin and formaldehyde. You have perfect structure, the voice buzzed from the mannequin's chest. You will look beautiful in the window. Elias watched in horror as the liquid was poured over his legs. Wherever it touched, the sensation vanished. He couldn't feel his toes. He couldn't feel his shins. He watched as his blue uniform trousers turned into a hard, gray shell. The paralysis crept up his body fast. He tried to scream, but the David thing poured the resin over his face. The last thing Elias saw was his own reflection in the shiny plastic face of the creature above him. But the twist wasn't that he died. No, death would have been a mercy. The twist is that Elias is still at the mall today. If you go to the Crestwood Mall, head to the second floor to a store called Velvet and Vogue. Look in the main window, you'll see a male mannequin standing tall, modeled in a sharp security guard uniform that they decided to use for a workwear display. His eyes are wide, looking slightly to the left. They say the eyes are the window to the soul, and if you look closely at that mannequin's eyes, you'll see they aren't painted on. They're real, and they are blinking, very, very slowly, begging you to run before the store closes. There are things on the highway that don't obey the laws of physics. We like to think that when we get behind the wheel of a massive 18-wheel steel beast, we are the kings of the road. We think that steel and diesel protect us from the dark. but ask any long-haul trucker, and they will tell you the truth. They'll tell you about the black dog, or the phantom hitchhikers, or the lights in the sky that move too fast. But the story I'm going to share with you tonight comes from a driver named Miller, and it isn't about ghosts, it's about biology. Impossible, terrifying biology. Miller was a veteran of the road. He had been hauling freight for 20 years, mostly on the graveyard shifts through the American Southwest. He liked the isolation. He liked the way the yellow lines blurred into a single golden thread pulling him forward. It was 3 a.m. on a stretch of Route 50 in Nevada, a road often called the loneliest road in America. Miller was hauling a load of timber to Salt Lake City. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, making the desert pitch black. The only light in the universe came from his high beams, cutting a cone through the darkness. He was cruising at a steady 70 miles per hour. The hum of the engine was a comfort, a lullaby he had known for 2 decades. He took a sip of his lukewarm coffee and glanced at his side view mirror. That's when he saw it. At the very edge of his mirror's visibility, illuminated by the red glow of his taillights, something was moving. At first, Miller thought it was a coyote. He'd seen plenty of them dart across the road, usually ending up as a messy speed bump. But this wasn't darting across, it was moving parallel to the truck. He squinted, adjusting his grip on the wheel. He watched the object in the mirror. It was pale, and it was big. Maybe a deer, he thought. But deer don't run alongside semi-trucks. They freeze, or they bolt. Miller checked the speedometer, 70 miles per hour. He looked back at the mirror. The shape was getting closer. It wasn't a coyote, it wasn't a deer. It was a man. Miller felt a cold jolt of adrenaline hit his heart so hard it hurt. He sat up straighter, rubbing his eyes, sure that the fatigue was finally causing hallucinations. He looked again. There, in the red wash of the brake lights, was a figure. It was humanoid, tall, and painfully thin. It was naked, its skin a dull grayish white that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. And it was running. It was running at 70 miles per hour. Miller's brain couldn't process the physics of it. At that speed, a human body should be tearing itself apart. The wind resistance alone should have knocked it backward. But this thing, it moved with a terrifying fluidity. Its legs were a blur, moving so fast they looked like the spokes of a spinning wheel. But its upper body was perfectly still. Its head didn't bob up and down. It glided. Miller let out a shaky breath and pressed his foot down on the accelerator. The engine roared, the turbo whistled, and the speedometer climbed. 75. 80. The rig shuddered. 80 miles per hour in a fully loaded truck on a 2-lane highway is dangerous. Miller gripped the wheel with white knuckles, his eyes darting back to the mirror. The thing hadn't fallen behind. It had matched his speed effortlessly. In fact, it was closer. It was now running right next to the trailer wheels. Miller could see the muscles in its legs rippling, thick cords of unnatural strength snapping and releasing. "What do you want?" Miller whispered to the empty cab. As if hearing him, the figure surged forward. It moved up the length of the trailer in seconds, pulling alongside the cab. Now it was right outside his window. Miller refused to look. He kept his eyes locked on the road ahead, praying that if he ignored it, it would vanish like a bad dream. But he could hear it now. Over the roar of the diesel engine in the wind, he heard the sound of bare feet slapping against the asphalt. Slap, 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 slap. A rhythm like machine gun fire. He couldn't help it. Human curiosity is a fatal flaw. Miller turned his head to the left. The window glass was the only thing separating him from the creature. It was running alongside the door, keeping perfect pace. It didn't have a face. Where the eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was just smooth, pale skin, like an unformed fetus or a mannequin before the features are painted on. But even without eyes, Miller knew it was looking at him. He felt the intensity of its focus burning through the glass. Then, the thing raised a hand. Its fingers were long, too long, with extra joints that bent in sickening directions. It reached out and tapped on the glass. Tapped on glass. At 80 miles per hour. Miller screamed. He swerved the truck hard to the right, crossing the center line, trying to shake the thing off. The trailer fishtailed, tires screeching in protest, threatening to jackknife. He wrestled the rig back under control, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked back to the left. The thing was still there. It hadn't even flinched. Its hand was still pressed against the glass.
Then a slit opened in the smooth skin of its face, a mouth. It opened wide, revealing rows of small, needle-like teeth, but no tongue. It wasn't attacking, it was screaming, but the sound was lost in the wind. Miller slammed on the brakes. It was a stupid move, a panic move. The air brakes hissed and locked up, smoke billowing from the tires as the massive truck skid across the asphalt, smelling of burnt rubber. The inertia threw Miller forward against the seatbelt, knocking the wind out of him. The truck ground to a halt in the middle of the desolate highway. Silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. Miller sat there gasping for air, clutching a tire iron he kept under the seat. He waited for the glass to shatter. He waited for the door to be ripped off its hinges. He looked out the driver's side window. Nothing. Just a dark desert. He looked in the mirrors. Nothing. Slowly, shaking like a leaf, Miller rolled down the window an inch to listen. The desert wind whistled. A distant coyote howled. But there was no slapping of feet. He had lost it. He had outbraked it. Miller let out a nervous, hysterical laugh. He put the truck back in gear, ready to get the hell out of there. But then he saw movement in his headlights. The figure was standing in the middle of the road, about 50 yards ahead of the truck. It was standing still, facing away from him. Its long, pale limbs were trembling. Miller hesitated. Should he run it over? Should he reverse? Before he could decide, the figure turned around. It didn't have that faceless, terrifying visage anymore. The mouth was closed, but its body language, it looked frantic. It waved its long arms at Miller. It was waving him forward. It was jumping up and down, pointing down the road, gesturing for him to drive, to move, to go faster. Miller frowned. Why would the monster want him to leave? The creature slapped its own head in frustration, then pointed a long finger past the truck, behind the truck. Miller felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. The creature hadn't been chasing him. It hadn't been hunting him. It was pacing him. It was trying to get in the cab. Miller slowly looked into his rearview mirror. The sky behind the truck wasn't black anymore. It was absent. The stars were gone. The horizon was gone. A wall of absolute shifting darkness was rolling over the highway, swallowing the yellow lines, swallowing the sagebrush, swallowing the world. It was a void, a massive living shadow that was moving faster than 70 miles per hour. And inside that wall of darkness, Miller saw thousands of eyes opening. The pale creature on the road screamed one last time, a high-pitched shriek of warning, and then it turned and sprinted away into the night, vanishing into the darkness ahead, running for its life. Miller didn't wait to see what the wall of darkness was. He slammed the accelerator to the floor, grinding the gears, pushing the engine past the red line. He drove until the sun came up, until the fuel tank was dry, and until he was 3 states away. He never drove the loneliest road again. But sometimes, when he looks in his side mirror at night, he sees a flash of pale skin running alongside him. And he doesn't feel fear anymore. He feels gratitude. Because he knows now that the thing running beside you isn't always the monster. Sometimes it's the only thing fast enough to warn you about what's coming up from behind.
There is a very specific, very primal fear that comes with working the night shift. It's the feeling of being in a fishbowl. When you are inside a brightly lit gas station at 3 a.m. with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, you are completely exposed. You can't see anything out there in the dark, but everything out there can see you. Tonight's story comes from a subscriber named Maya, who spent 5 years working the graveyard shift at a remote station off Interstate 95. She saw drunks, she saw thieves, and she saw accidents. But she says she would take any of those over the silent man at pump number 4. It was a Tuesday in November, a night where the wind was howling so hard it rattled the sliding glass doors of the station kiosk. Maya was sitting behind the counter, trying to stay awake by reading a magazine. The clock on the wall read 2:14 a.m. when the ding-ding sound of the driveway sensor went off. Maya looked up. A car had pulled up to pump 4. It was an old, beat-up gray sedan covered in rust and road salt. The engine cut off with a sputtering cough. Maya waited for the driver to get out and pump gas. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a heavy, oversized trench coat that looked damp. He shut the car door, but he didn't reach for the nozzle. He didn't walk toward the store to buy snacks. He just stood there. He stood perfectly still, right next to his car, facing the glass front of the store, facing Maya. At first, Maya didn't think much of it. People do weird things when they're tired. Maybe he was checking his phone, maybe he was looking for his wallet. She looked back down at her magazine. 10 minutes passed. Maya looked up again. The man hadn't moved. And I don't mean he hadn't left the pump. I mean he hadn't shifted his weight. His hands were hanging limply by his sides. His head was cocked slightly to the right, and he was staring directly at her. From that distance, about 30 feet away, she couldn't make out the details of his face, but she could feel the weight of his gaze. It felt heavy, intentional. Maya pressed a button for the intercom that broadcasted to the pumps. "Sir," she said, her voice crackling over the outside speakers. "The pumps are on. Do you need help with something?" The man didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't even acknowledge the sound of her voice. He just kept staring. A cold knot formed in Maya's stomach. She checked the lock on the front door. It was a magnetic lock, controlled by a switch behind the counter. It was engaged. She was safe inside. But the sight of him, motionless in the swirling wind, was making her skin crawl. Another 15 minutes passed. A truck pulled into the station, a big 18-wheeler. The driver hopped out, fueled up quickly at the diesel island, and came inside to buy a coffee. Maya felt a wave of relief. She wasn't alone anymore. "Did you see that guy at pump 4? Maya asked the trucker as he paid. The trucker frowned. "Yeah, weirdo. I said hello to him, asked if his car was broken. He didn't say a word, just looked right through me. You should call the cops, miss. That ain't right." When the trucker left, the isolation hit Maya 10 times harder. She was alone with the statue man again. It had now been an hour, 3:15 a.m. Maya grabbed the store phone and dialed the non-emergency line. She explained the situation to the dispatcher, that a man was loitering and acting strange. The dispatcher sighed, sounding bored, and said they'd send a patrol car when one became available, but it wasn't a priority since he wasn't being aggressive. Maya hung up and sat on a stool behind the counter, sinking down so only her eyes were visible above the register. She watched him. He was so still that he looked like a cardboard cutout. The wind was whipping the hem of his trench coat, blowing his hair wildly, but his body remained rigid. It was unnatural. Humans are always moving. We shift our feet, we cross our arms, we scratch our noses. He did none of that. Then the lights in the parking lot flickered. It was just a momentary power dip from the wind, but for a second, the figure was plunged into darkness. When the lights buzzed back on, Maya gasped. He was closer. He wasn't at the pump anymore. He was standing in the middle of the driving lane, 10 feet closer to the door. She hadn't seen him walk. In that split second of darkness, he had moved. And now that he was closer, she could see his face. His skin was pale, almost gray. His eyes were wide open, so wide that she could see the white all around the iris. And his mouth was hanging open slightly, jaw slack, as if he was in the middle of a scream that wouldn't come out. Maya grabbed the phone again. Her hands were shaking so bad she dropped it twice before dialing 911. "He's moving toward the store," she whispered to the operator. "Please, hurry." "Stay on the line," the operator said. "Are the doors locked?" "Yes," Maya said. He's just staring at me. He looks crazy." Suddenly, the man raised his hand. Maya flinched, dropping the phone. She scrambled backward, knocking over a display of chewing gum. She huddled against the back wall of the kiosk, grabbing a box cutter she used for opening inventory. She peeked over the counter. The man was now right up against the glass. He wasn't banging on it. He wasn't trying to break it. He was pressed against it, his face smushed against the safety glass, distorting his features. His breath was fogging up the pane. He was tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was a slow, rhythmic sound. His wide, unblinking eyes were locked onto Maya's. She screamed at him. "Go away! The police are coming!" The man didn't react to her scream. He just kept tapping. Tap, tap, tap. And then Maya noticed something. She noticed the direction of his eyes. He wasn't looking at her face. He wasn't looking at her eyes. He was looking slightly above her head. The tapping got faster. Tap, 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 tap. His mouth began to move. He was mouthing something through the thick glass. Maya couldn't hear him, but she could read his lips. He was saying the same phrase over and over again. Maya squinted, trying to understand. "Do not move."
That's what he was saying. Do not move. Blue and red lights suddenly flooded the parking lot. 2 police cruisers screeched into the station, sirens blaring. Officers jumped out, guns drawn. Get on the ground. Show us your hands. The man at the window didn't turn around to face the police. He didn't even acknowledge them. He kept his face pressed to the glass, his eyes locked on the space above Maya's head, tapping frantically now. One of the officers ran up and tackled the man from behind, slamming him onto the concrete pavement. As they dragged him away from the glass, the man finally found his voice. He didn't scream in anger. He screamed in pure, unadulterated terror. He screamed, "It's still in there! It's still in there!" Maya stood up slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. The police were handcuffing the man, who was sobbing now, hysterical. One of the officers approached the door and signaled for Maya to unlock it. She fumbled with the switch and buzzed him in. "You okay, miss?" the officer asked. I think so, Maya said. He was just standing there for 2 hours. He wouldn't move. The officer looked back at the squad car where the man was thrashing. "We'll get him evaluated. He looks like he's on something heavy." The officer turned to leave, but then the radio on his shoulder crackled. It was his partner, the one who was questioning the man in the back of the car. "Jim, you need to hear this," the partner's voice said over the radio. "The suspect isn't high. He says he wasn't staring at the girl." Maya froze. The officer pressed the button on his radio. "What do you mean?" "He says he pulled up to get gas." The voice on the radio continued, "and he saw something crawl into the ventilation shaft on the roof of the kiosk. He says he's been standing there for 2 hours trying to keep eye contact with it, because every time he looked away, it started coming out of the vent." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. The air conditioning vent in the kiosk was located directly above the cash register, directly above where she had been sitting for the last 2 hours. The officer and Maya both slowly looked up at the ceiling. The vent cover was missing. And staring down from the dark square hole in the ceiling tiles was a face. It was upside down. It had no skin, just raw, wet muscle, and too many teeth. As Maya looked up, the thing smiled, and a drop of thick, dark saliva landed on her cheek. The man outside hadn't been stalking her. He had been the only thing keeping the monster from dropping down, and now that he was gone, there was nothing stopping it.